throughout the program, so we really right from the get-go have a continual relationship with the school, however long that relationship might be, and certainly seem to extend that over a 2 to 3 year period as opposed to just a simple 9 to 18 months. In that individual organisations' needs in particular, and really focusing on their school goals and underpinning that with a middle leaders improvement plan, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment or two. Okay, so Andy, I know you're probably on mute now, but if anything else you want to add to that before I go on to the next slide, please do so now.
No, that's fine, carry on.
Okay, so slide 3. Thanks, Andy. So why have we developed the program? Well, as I've sort of indicated already there, we felt that there were some gaps there that we really need to look at to develop. And it was really about getting into the depth of what those middle leaders could do whilst they were in our sessions, and then transferring that back into the classroom and into their teams. Specifically looking at some of the feedback we had around differentiation needing to occur. We could have just looked at differentiating the programs themselves and the actual sessions, but we felt as though this wouldn't really get to where we needed to be. So one of the key aspects that we've had is to develop a competency framework, which again we will talk about a little bit later on, which really focuses on the school identifying what experience their middle leaders bring to the actual sessions. So it actually enables us to sort of put some differentiated materials in place, which they will then develop into a bespoke offer for every individual school to target specifically at the middle leaders that we're working with. We will have several audits that will enable to get us the information to us, which again we'll touch on in a little bit more time, but specifically still using the talent map that you will be familiar with from actually engage with that tool. You will have heard them talk about it. But also a competency framework, which has really been taken from the work that we've done on fellows to really again developing what we've actually had in place, but transferring that learning and that knowledge to make the schools and the teams programs much more applicable to the schools, making them more bespoke as we work with them. Andy, I think that's all I wanted to say on that, again, unless there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, that's great, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next slide now. He says hopefully. There we go. So this really just gives us the brief timeline for the delivery of this. So you'll see that the main delivery begins in September. We've been having some sort of soft conversations with 1 or 2 academy groups that we work with during June. We'll be finalising and pulling together all the materials July to August, and then launching properly in September, which is when the delivery will also start with some of those that we were talking to at the moment. Particularly some of the academy groups that we work with have been asking for a primary version of this so that they've got an offer that can work with all of their schools. And we weren't originally going to do this until a year from now, given that the primary program is kind of a blend, almost sort of halfway between the 2 approaches in terms of schools and fellows. But because of that demand, we've actually decided to bring that forward to January, which is quite challenging because obviously some of the materials need to be rewritten and refocused, but we're planning to do that quite low key in January. So this next slide I'm going to just briefly mention, because then the different components that are on it we'll go through, but this summarizes the whole process. So at the top you've got a cycle which typically would run for an academic year, but obviously will flex around the time in which a school comes on board, where we start with the audit and planning, as Rose was talking about earlier, and feeding into that audit and plan you've got 3 of the tools. Again, the talent tool that you'll be familiar with, the individual audit LCF, that's the same as the one we use at the moment, and then a new tool that I'll come and say a bit more about in a moment, the MLCF. And all of that feeds into an initial planning meeting at which the school agrees with us what the provision is going to look like. There's lots more on offer now, as you can see from the delivery and various different options, and we'll go through those with you in a moment. But as a result of the talent tool, you'll see that they may identify some potential fellows, and they'll go on their own track there across the bottom. But then the schools that we're working with will then buy into 4 training sessions with the option to top up to 8 or 12, and then have these other elements as well. All of the progress is monitored through what we're calling the MLIP, which is the Middle Leader Improvement Plan. That's the document upon which the whole thing is the goals are recorded, and the progress and outcomes are recorded on too, and that mid-year review is the first of those, and obviously you can see on the right you've got the end-of-year review. We don't think about who the facilitators, potential the facilitator, or who's going to work with the in-school facilitator are going to be until we know what the plan is, so that we can make sure we get the right facilitators depending on what the materials are that the schools are choosing. I think it's worth also saying that whilst we would quite like to have facilitators at that initial planning meeting, just the cost of the time of all of that is something that obviously we're having to keep an eye on. So then on the right hand side you then have the review at the end of the year, using the same tools again, seeing whether or not the objectives that have been set on the school plan have been met, and that meeting will double up as being the review meeting for the following year as well. So moving on to the next slide. So if a school decides it wants to come in, it gets all the things on the left as part of the kind of package price, which are the meetings, 4 training sessions, 32 of those available now, and Rose will say a bit more of those. And we've written 2 sets of books. One you'll be familiar with, What Makes a Great Middle Leader, but we've also now written another one, well it's currently in production, called What Makes a Great Middle Leadership Team, which has all the same chapters as the other book, but it's written for a senior leader, encouraging and helping and advising them about how they can get the most out of their middle leadership teams, because as many of you will know if you've been on teams, or indeed for those of you who are working on fellows, sometimes that can be the blockage for an individual, and so this is a part of the idea, is a part of the way we're going to unblock this. I'm just going to just have a swig of something and cough. I'm going to mute myself, hold on a sec, sorry about this. I'm going down with some lurgy, so my apologies. Thank you very much. 1 or 2 questions are coming in. We'll pick those all up at the end, so keep those coming. And then you'll see on the right hand side the various different options that schools can choose to buy in. The 2 types of coaching, I think they're self-explanatory. We can teach them, so as in the senior colleagues in the school, coaching skills, facilitation skills, and then they can top up in multiples of 4 sessions, so it doesn't have to be 4, they can choose 8 or 16 and so on. 8 or 12, sorry. And then the other thing we're introducing, which I'm particularly excited about, is the concept of a Viva, which again we'll come back to in a moment. So the tools, the TL Talent tool you'll be familiar with. Oh, so Rose, you're picking up these, aren't you? I do apologise. Over to you.
That's okay. Give you a chance to have a drink, Andy. Okay, thank you. So as Andy says, the TL Talent tool, most of you are familiar with, as I said, you not just do with the school, but fundamentally actually gives us the information that we need around which routes our the middle leaders within the school should follow. On top of that, we have the Middle Leadership Competency Framework, which is a new piece of work that we've developed on the Leadership Competency Framework, which is underpins the Fellows Programme. So we looked at how that competency framework would be able to be judging what level of competency the middle leaders as a group of middle leaders within one organisation would have. So the idea is that the head, hopefully the leadership team, the middle leaders and even their teams would be able to complete this competency framework to give an indication of whether the middle leaders are one of 3 categories. First of all, emerging, so they could be new middle leaders that haven't been in that role very long, or in fact not even started in the leadership role. They could be stationary in the sense that they are have been middle leaders for a while, that they're fairly competent, that they are strengthening in their skills. And the third one would be embedded. So those are the middle leaders that perhaps need a bit more challenge. They may not be ready or may not wish to go into a senior leadership role, but will need to have more of a challenging delivery, so that we're actually differentiating the sessions based on those three areas. The school goals that we mentioned earlier will all be embedded within a middle leader improvement plan. So this underpins the whole of the school's work with teaching leaders, and so they are actually held accountable for this as opposed to teaching leaders being held accountable. So I think for those of you who've worked on teams have identified and realised that often what happens is that if the school is not really holding the leaders to account, because we don't have the same approach with the teams that we have with the Fellows programme, they often aren't held to account in a way that is really ensuring that there's an impact on the students' outcomes. So we've really shifted that and again, that will be looked at and reviewed when we have those three meetings with the schools over the course of their learning journey with us. One of the things that I just wanted to add on to what Andy had said is that in those initial meetings where we work with the school and meet with the head, we are going to put in some intensive training for our school relations to ensure that they have got the educational knowledge that they will need to bring to have those conversations with the head teachers at that time. Okay, Andy, I think slide 8, unless you want to add anything else to that.
Gosh, this feels like learning to drive for the first time. Okay, here we go. So slide 8, there we go. Rose, are you talking about that one as well, according to my notes?
I can indeed do, yes. So the leadership competency framework, which I think we've rested a couple of times already, is the fundamental part of the Fellows programme. What we have decided to offer through the schools programme is that in addition to the middle leadership competency framework, which looks at the entire middle leadership group, they will also be able to access it as individuals. So they'll be able to have it from two angles. First of all, as the whole team, directing on what materials they need to have delivered. And if they want to drill down a little bit further, they can do it as an individual basis as well. Then the development plan, which is, as said on the slide, it's for the middle leaders to show how they, as individuals, will be actually working within the programme. So that, again, is two angles coming in. We have the whole school middle leadership development plan, which all middle leaders will be incorporating in, as alongside the development plan if the schools wish to drill that down to a little bit further. So it's just adding in more layers, so they'll be able to make it such more of a comprehensive program, as opposed to, as I said previously, just individual CPD sessions. Okay, Andy.
Thanks very much, Rose. So the next slide here just goes into a bit more detail about what happens in each of the meetings and who attends them. I think it's probably pretty self-explanatory, and you probably don't need me to say much. The three meetings refer to the planning meeting at the beginning of the year, meeting 2 is the mid-year review, and then meeting 3 is the one that reviews the first cycle and sets the goals and the programme elements for the second. If you've got any particular questions on that one, then obviously we can pick those up in a moment. Keep the questions coming. Rose, there's just one question there about MPQML, which I think I know the answer to, but I'd quite like to get your take on it. But in the meantime, it's back to you for the slide to talk about the sessions. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. From this slide, there are 32 sessions across the 3 levels, and we've had some fun trying to decide what to call these, and we have plumped for rapid change. Now, this came really from the idea of those that, as I said, will be coming from the emerging middle leaders. So they're the ones that are new to middle leadership or haven't even started middle leadership before. This has also really been directed from schools' requests, where gone into a situation where they really need to do something very quickly about the middle leadership team. It could be special measures, it might be going from good to requires improvement, stretch their middle leaders, and I think that's where the rapid change heading has really come from. They will be focusing on how to. So management level focus on some of them. So for example, it might be how to conduct a learning walk. It might be how to prepare your team for an audit inspection, how to an effective presentation to a range of audiences. So there's about 11 sessions that are focusing on the how-to, really looking at the basic skills. The second type of sessions will be the core sessions, and these, as I said, will be for the middle leaders who have come out with strengthening skills. So they could be similar to sort of fellow, where they have some experience but need to be challenged a bit more. Much of these materials have been drawn from what you're already using that we know work well. The final element is the Core Plus, and these are from those that have the embedded, so the middle leadership competency framework that the head fills in. Well, as I said earlier on, will develop from the rapid change for the emerging, the core for the strengthening, and the Core Plus for the embedded middle leaders. So these will be a bit more challenging. We'll expect them to think a little bit harder about how they actually apply this to their teams and impact on student outcomes. We've made the sessions 2.5 hours. This is from feedback that we've had from our team's programs, and it is felt that sometimes the materials, there's not enough there for 3 hours, and we've got into the habit perhaps of doing 3 hours more out of habit than actual precision. So we've really drilled down to try to make sure that it is pacey and they're focusing really closely on what needs to be delivered in a shorter session, making it much more focused. There may be some occasions where we need to stretch that to 3 hours, either because there is some intersessional task, which it will be an additional to the session on its own, or it might be that we have a group school that we can extend that session to 3 hours, but the majority we would expect to be 2.5 hours. Then an additional 30 minutes, which will be around the things that sit outside the learning. Sometimes this is repetitive, and we find that on Teams programs this isn't always done because of relationship with the group, and so it's really about listening to that feedback that we've had to say if you need to go through the contracting again. The in-school facilitator might want to raise something that is outside of that teaching leader's session. So those extra 30 minutes will be sometimes used, sometimes they won't. And I have had some feedback from some facilitators who've been, but we're also very mindful that we don't want to kickstart sessions with a boring introduction, so we will listen to how that and decisions will be made when those programs are planned and consequently delivered. Okay, Andy?
Thanks, Rose. Apologies, I hadn't realised you could see my mouse because I've got all sorts of other things on my screen here, like muting and unmuting myself, but so I'll try and keep the movement to a minimum. Yeah, so performance coaching, we've taken the view that it would be a good idea to offer coaching as part of this package. We're not expecting that many schools will take it up because it's quite an expensive element of the programme, as you can imagine. But for new entrants, mentoring for performance, much more at that end of the coaching spectrum, with coaching for excellence probably more for experienced and schools that potentially are a bit further down their improvement journey. If a school buys a package, they get 6 sessions for 1 middle leader, which includes 4 face-to-face and, as it says, the 2 phone or Skype sessions. And it's very much picking up on the question that came up earlier. That's very much about support for individuals rather than institutional coaching. We're also, as we mentioned earlier, running sessions for SLT on coaching skills. That's 2 sessions of 3 hours, very similar to what we currently offer at schools, and 1 session on facilitation skills for members of the SLT or others who might be involved in facilitating. We're not offering facilitation skills to in-school facilitators, but we will be running a webinar training offer for them. If any of you have been involved in those, you'll know that they haven't always gone well, because quite often there's a very big range, with quite a few of the people turning up for that being quite skilled at facilitation already. But we'll obviously need to see how that one works, and your feedback on that will be particularly important, but clearly you modelling facilitation will be an important part of and agreeing with them and helping them develop as facilitators will be a really useful and important spin-off for helping the system move forward and develop capacity. So the idea of the Viva, as set out here, is that at the end of the cycle usually, but the school can decide when it wants to do this, each of the middle leaders will have a 30-minute face-to-face conversation with what we're calling an external assessor who we will source, and we're working with a number of different organisations to source those individuals. And the focus of that conversation is a validation of the middle leader's CEF. And we're probably going to be asking schools to use a format that we're going to provide, unless they've got one and it's really good. Our initial research shows that fewer schools have CEFs at middle leadership level than perhaps we'd initially anticipated. So we always knew we were going to provide our own template for this as a fallback position, but it may well be that most schools will end up using it, and that will then, not be that dissimilar from the sort of conversation that a middle leader would have with an Ofsted inspection during an inspection. But obviously, the focus of this is validation, and they'll get some feedback at the end in a written form, but we'll have had some verbal feedback at the end of that conversation, just giving them an idea of how that's gone. Where a school wants to invest even more, instead of having the half an hour, they can have an hour, where the first half an hour is pretty similar to the school's Viva I've just described, but where following that then is 30 minutes to help the individual middle leader think about, as a result of that audit process, what they actually need to do and want to do over the coming year. And they'll have been asked to prep something about that in advance, but it will be support to talk through a kind of mentoring stroke coaching conversation with them about what that might look like. Excuse me, I'm just going to have another swig. And obviously, as it says there, the real focus here will be on pupil outcomes and the leadership competency framework in reaching some of those judgments and conversations. But there's no pass or fail or anything like that with this. It's just giving them a chance to face that external audience. Okay, so looking next at the managing the programme in school, as it says, clearly the head has got the overview of this following the initial meeting that will take place. But we've then got the in-school facilitator to be familiar with, but also we felt it was important here to just talk about the importance of what we're calling the in-school coordinator, because in many schools they may not be the same person. The person who's facilitating may not be the person, typically who is running the CPD for the school as a whole. In some cases that may be one and the same person, but often it isn't. So we felt it was important to distinguish between those two roles. Both would be invited to the planning meetings that we were talking about earlier. We're then going to run online training for those three areas. JPD theory and how they might want to use that in their own schools, facilitation skills as I mentioned earlier, but also what to and how to use those 30-minute sessions and what the between session tasks might look like and how they may want to work with those. And that I think will naturally probably be something that forms part of the dialogue that facilitators or the facilitator for the particular programme will contribute to informally through that process and the relationship they build up with the in-school facilitator and potentially the in-school coordinator. So quite a lot there to take in, but I'm just going to now try and open up the question box again, which I've been resisting. So we've got a couple of questions that came in before I was on again there. The first was from David on will they still be able to do MPQML? So Rose, my understanding is that what we said we would do is not advertise it particularly, but if a school really wanted to do it, that we may advise them about which modules they should and shouldn't do. But we're not going to be pushing this as much as we have done in the past with the Teams program. But Rose, am I up to date with that? Is that the latest position on this?
Yeah, that's the latest position, and I think one of the things that we've said we would do if there is still a very strong appetite for MPQML, we would revisit the accreditation of all the sessions. One of the reasons that we've made sure that the core sessions are not vastly different from some of the current team sessions is because that transition would be relatively easy to get it across. So until we know what the MPQML is going to exactly look like, which of course we still don't know, we are saying that at the moment it's as you described, Andy.
Thanks, Rose. And then Phil has popped a question up there about how facilitators potentially can feed back into the three school meetings, or the second and the third in particular, or asking the question, will they have an opportunity to do that? And I think that's a really important part of what we're envisaging will happen, Rose, isn't it? Which is that, you know, we'll have dialogue through, excuse me, between facilitators in school contacts, but the facilitators will be in touch with the team at the centre, so that they have an opportunity to feed into the process, as well as obviously get the feedback that comes back out, because part of what we'll be asking them, you know, and we'll be having discussion with them, is on the session scores as well. But I think the critical thing for me, before I hand to you, Rose, just to add anything you want to add, is about facilitators, as they are at the moment on Teams, as far as I know, being really proactive in contacting us if there are things that you think you know we should be aware of, so that we can raise those, because this has to be something that we're doing in partnership, but it also has to be something where schools need to understand what's expected of them and how we're expecting them and their middle leaders to engage with the process. Rose, is there anything you'd like to add? So it's a really good question, Philip, and thanks for including that.
Yeah, no. The only thing I would add, Andy, is that for those of you who haven't facilitated on the Teams programs, I think there is a very subtle but strong difference between facilitation on the fellows, where you will fill in your evaluation form, but you tend to not have that long-term relationship with the school, so it's a slightly different feel. Whereas the feedback that we get from facilitators who are working with schools on a long term, when it is going smoothly and everything is really appearing to be impactful and everything's getting good feedback, there isn't that much of an in-depth relationship that we would hear back from facilitators. But where we have challenging schools, or where we have a program that really needs to have some more work done in terms of adjusting the sessions, then absolutely those relationships from facilitators is absolutely fundamental to that. So but also those informal conversations that we have through the Teams program, schools program to be known as, from going forward. But one of the things that we will be looking at is how we can actually make that more seamless for facilitators. So within the evaluation forms, that there is an area within that would actually pick up that information on terms of how well it's going, what might need to be fed back into the middle meeting. But I think some of this at this stage, it is definitely those first schools that we are delivering to. There will be a certain element of review, what we can do to improve and to get better. So the facilitators that we engage to do these initial deliveries, we will be obviously speaking to them on a one-to-one basis before they actually go out into the schools.
Thanks very much, Rose. Next question comes from Leanne, which is, could someone just send me a message to tell me whether or not you can see all the questions, because there's no point in me reading them out if you can. Okay, I'll carry on reading them then. So the next question comes from Leanne, who's asking about whether or not the coaches will come from existing facilitators or coaches, or will they be newly recruited? And the answer is very much we want to use our tried and tested colleagues. So I don't think we're envisaging, unless there's a particular shortage in a given geographical area, that we would be going outside of that, other than the normal process of you know, recruiting new people for growth generally. Rose, do you want to add to that?
The only thing that I will add to that is that Kevin has been doing the coaching development sessions across all three regions, Kevin O'Neill. If any of the coaches who may be on this session have not been at that, and there is an opportunity for you to share your interest. So if you have got an interest, you're a coach with us already, and you would like to be engaged with any future opportunities, then please just let your regional office know.
Thanks, Rose. So the next question was, when teaching leaders works with schools to set up their programme, will facilitators be briefed prior to the delivery of any sessions? And again, that's from Philip. Yeah, absolutely is the answer to that. I mean, if we could afford it, we could have facilitators actually coming to those meetings, but we've had to just try and, as I said earlier, manage the costs there. But absolutely, so you'll get the MLIP that will have all of the information about the school, what it's trying to achieve, what the goals are for the programme, what they've bought. But also, I guess there'll be a phone conversation that will brief you of the complete situation. We have got a text box there where schools are able to add in anything that they think it'd be useful for us to know about the situation that the school is in. Again, Rose, I'm going to go through the last few questions, and then if you want to pick up on any of them in one go, then please do. The next question comes from Jacqueline Brown. Will the schools programme be available in all regions, or will you be starting in selected regions? So my understanding is that we're going to make this available in all the regions. We're obviously, as you've picked up, starting quite slowly with this, and of course we don't know how quickly demand will pick up either. I think we're envisaging in the course of the first year to be running about 70 altogether in the first year. So we want to really get this right and learn as we go. So it will build up quite slowly, but I don't think we've said we're going to test or pilot in any particular region. And that again is partly because some of our partner schools and academy groups obviously operate across quite wide geographical areas anyway. So Rose, is there anything you want to just pick up on either of those two?
Note that you are correct in your figures.
Great, thank you very much. So at the moment, that has answered all of the questions. I'm wondering, Leanne has just said thank you, Andy and Rose. Just last chance to ask any questions if you'd like to. Oh, I can't believe we've done this, Rose. Nothing springs to mind now. How much will the programme cost schools? That's such a welding question. Thanks for the question, Steve. I don't know the answer to that. I know that we've been... Do you know, Hannah? No, I'm just looking around. Rose, do you know what the latest... Because I don't know whether it's been finalised.
What was the question, sorry?
How much will the programme cost schools? So there's the core cost, and then there's the cost of the individual elements. Have we finalised those?
Yeah. We're still working on those, and I think it's fair to say that it will be comparable to what our team's programs are currently costing. We've tested that out with the market, and we certainly want to make sure that we make it, to have the impact, we need to make sure that schools can afford it. So we have been informed by our current costing structure as well as the feedback that we're currently getting from schools.
Great, and Leanne is asking if colleagues have got any other questions, to whom, lovely use of grammar here, should we direct them? And I'm guessing that will be either the head of coaching or head of training for the usual contact. Rose, would you recommend, or?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. They can either do it to their the team's pen, so that would be Hannah Nixon in the south, and Lorraine Heyman, I'm just saying Laurie Heyman, she's got married in the north.
Great.
Or the head of training, yeah.
Yeah. Philip has just commented, yeah, sounds like an excellent programme with accountability built into it, which is great, and I think that works both ways. I particularly like the fact that we're just, doing a proper diagnosis, but then once we've done that diagnosis, really with 32 sessions we're going to be able to and all the other options around coaching and all the things that we know make a real difference. If a school wants to really use us as a big source of its CPD for its middle leaders, there's a hell of a package, and with the Viva then being able to have a bit of an edge to it and some rigour about what's been achieved over the course of the cycle, it's very exciting. And I have to say that the school relations team have said that in the early testing of this, which obviously we did before we finalised the programme, but subsequently there seems to be a strong appetite for it. But of course no one knows what it's going to cost, going back to Philip's earlier question. So, sorry, Steve's earlier question. So we'll have to wait and see what the actual response is. Last question, how soon before a programme starting might we be invited to facilitate? So I'm not sure, and David has asked that question, David Radomski. I think we're probably talking weeks, Rose, would that be right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we normally work on timetabling sessions as they come in, depending on our availability in terms of the capacity within the team, within the offices, but also the capacity that we have within our facilitators as well, because we only will use our experienced facilitators within the school teams, the school program, as is with teams at the moment. So as soon as we've got a booking, shall we say, we will then notify the facilitator straight away, because that's really important. They get a run-in to prepare for it.
And the facilitators will be the key face of the organisation with those individual schools. So, making sure we get a really good match there is going to be a critical part of what central teams do with you guys in making that work. Very exciting. So I think we'll finish there. Just a quick plea, if I might, which is that if you've got the time and you're not rushing off to something else, if you have a chance to do a quick what went well, even better if, about Rose and our facilitation of this, given it's the first time we've ever done it on our own, that would be very much appreciated, because there's probably some things that we're doing that aren't quite working. So in particular, any EBIs you've got, that would be great. But also in terms of the what went well, was the length about right? Was the level of content about right? Because it's quite hard to judge these things. So any feedback that you can spare, just pop it in through the questions. We'll just leave that running for a couple of minutes. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll leave it there. Rose, anything you'd like to add by way of finish?
No, just thank you ever so much for your ongoing contribution, and as Andy said, any feedback would be really helpful. It's a complex programme, and I think that it will take a little bit of time for us to understand all the different elements, so just please keep those questions coming.
Thanks, everyone. Rose, can you still hear me?